Okay. So today I am very excited to welcome our guest, Mark Eden Horowitz. Mark is a senior music specialist in the music division of the Library of Congress, where among the collections for which he's been curator or co-curator are the papers of Leonard Bernstein, Leslie Bricusse, Vernon Duke, Ella Fitzgerald, Oscar Hammerstein, Jerome Kern, Alan J. Lerner, Frederick Loewe, Cole Porter, Hal Prince, Richard Rogers, and Vincent Youmans. Among the collections he's acquired for the library are the papers of Howard Ashman, Burt Bacharach, Adam Guettel, Marvin Hamlisch, Jonathan Larson, Arthur Lawrence, sorry, Andrew Lippa, Neil Simon, Stephen Sondheim, and Janine Tesori. He's the author of the books Sondheim on Music and The Letters of Oscar Hammerstein II, and for 10 years was the contributing editor for the Sondheim Review. He taught the history of musical theater at Catholic and Georgetown universities. He's also the author of the liner notes for Sondheim, The Story So Far, Hugh Martin, Hidden Treasures, Songs for Stage and Screen, and Anthony DeMar's Liaisons, Reimagining Sondheim from the Piano, and chapters in the books A Cole Porter Companion and the Oxford Handbook of Musical Theater Adaptations. So, Mark, I will now hand it over to you.
Thank you, Megan. I'm flattered to have been asked, and I look forward to this. Thank you, everyone. One caveat before we begin. It's been a bit of a nightmare day in that I just was given a new computer this morning, and we only got it working about 10 minutes before all this. And there have been several hiccups along the way. So any technical problems, please forgive. And let's get started. I first got to know Sondheim in 1990 when I was working on a production of Merrily We Roll Along at Arena Stage. In fact, he borrowed my rhyming dictionary, and when he returned it, he let me know that he'd written in some missing words, which he had in fact done. I then started at the library in 1991, so I've been here 35 years. Um, so I was working here and I saw an announcement in the Washington Post that Sondheim was getting a Helen Hayes Lifetime Achievement Award. So he'd be coming to town. So I wrote him a letter saying, Steve, I'm now working at the Library of Congress and I see you're coming and I'd love to invite you for a show and tell. I think I can guarantee you a moving experience. And he wrote back that yes, he'd be happy to come. And he did. And let's see. I spent a few weeks preparing for his visit, including he had been a guest on Desert Island Disc, at which they published his selections, and there's the list. And it turned out that we had manuscripts by everybody on his list, and in some cases actually had the manuscript for the item he had mentioned, such as we have Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra. Um, and let's see here. That's the list of the things I actually showed him, and it included things from his mentor, Oscar Hammerstein, his teacher, Milton Babbitt, collaborators Leonard Bernstein and Richard Rogers, and other favorites of his in addition to the Desert Island Disc things. But the most memorable thing was when I brought out the manuscripts for Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, he started to cry. And I think that was the thing that stuck with him more than anything. And I will say, in general, through my history at the library, our greatest selling point has always been our collections themselves because they're so extraordinary and people want to have their papers join all these other master works. So it sometimes makes it quite easy. And in fact, the hardest thing is telling people no. Um, so let's see here. So after the visit, we only touched a little bit on the idea of his collection coming to the library, but we did discuss it a little bit, and then I sent a follow-up letter to him, which is there to sort of pursue things a little further. Then I got this thank you note from him, which includes, thank you for the wonderful time I had in Washington. I've not stopped talking about what I saw at the library since, and you may very well get calls from people like Cameron McIntosh and Julie Andrews, etc. They were all fascinated and excited. And as it happens, I have now done show and tells for Cameron McIntosh and Julie Andrews. Um, um, So next slide. Um, I arranged to visit his collection and then made comments about what I'd seen, including the things that we were and weren't interested in. There's the letter with all that detail. I tend to, the one lesson from Sondheim I never really got was less is more. So I tend to overdo things, or certainly did in those days. Um, and I got this response from him where he says, among other things, I think you've made your case and I will change my will. And then he sent this note to the chief of the music division where he says, I'm delighted about leaving my stuff to the library, which was very gratifying to receive. Um, then the terrible, frightening thing happened. In February 1995, Sondheim had a fire. The fire started in the office, and his manuscripts were kept in the closet right off the office. It was wooden shelves, cardboard boxes, paper inside, and it's the closest I've ever seen to a miracle. It was a fire so hot that CDs melted together. Virtually everything in the office itself was lost. With I can't figure out what it was other than miraculous intervention that saved his manuscripts. And in fact, when I went back later, the boxes that had been on the bottom shelves, when you took the manuscripts out of the boxes, there were singe marks outlining where the manuscripts sat in the boxes themselves. So again, paper and cardboard on wood and a miracle. As soon as I learned about the fire, I sent him this letter along with a list of curators in New York who might be able to help him. I sent it by fax, and I realized later I don't know that he ever received it because I think his fax machine had burned up, but I don't know for a fact. And memory is such that, anyway, um, let's see. Um, oh, so after his fire, one of the things he decided to donate immediately was his record collection. I think he'd mostly moved to CDs by that point. And fortunately, his record collection was saved. The fascinating thing about his record collection was that one of the things we had to do was match the sleeves with the records themselves because he'd kept them in separate binders that he had made, and the actual sleeves were in storage. So, which I find fascinating in that it meant that he'd never read the liner notes, presumably. There were about 11,000 records, virtually all classical, a surprising number of South American and Scandinavian composers. It also came with 6 boxes of cards that he prepared listing every composer, a card or sometimes 10 cards for each composer and everything that he had by them. And it's the most extraordinary list. I feel I'm somewhat knowledgeable musically, but I'd say I'd never heard of 90% of the composers on this list. So it really was a wonderful addition to our collections. Um, which slide is this? Sorry about this. This is the third PowerPoint I think I've ever done in my life. Um, oh, we finally got language from his will. This was the letter he'd met with his lawyer. He changed his will and he sent the language that was in it, which included the manuscripts of my own compositions and literary creations. This is not the final version of his will that came with the actual bequest, but this was the version he changed to at the time. So, um, uh, Um, I wanted to keep engagement with Sondheim as much as possible. He's had a prickly side, and I knew that there was nothing to prevent him changing his will. So I wanted to sort of um, enrich our relationship with him and strengthen his ties to the library. As a result, among other things, I had the notion of doing a series of videotaped interviews with him And the interviews would focus on his manuscripts, asking questions that we presumed researchers might ask when they came to look at them years later, very technical things. And this would be over 3 days in New York in his home with his manuscripts at my side. And to my delight, he agreed. And so I went up, and there's um, we have now actually put the videotapes of these interviews, and it's 6.5 hours worth at this point that are now online on the library's website and the library's YouTube channel. They're in half-hour segments, and there are 13 half-hour segments. Um, but the plan had never been that these would be a book, but I did transcribe them. And after transcribing them, I realized that they were sort of richer, more readable than I'd imagined they would be. And a publisher was interested. Sondheim agreed. And it's now been published in 3 editions. The most recent one is the paperback, and each edition has had additional interviews included in it. Um, okay. So next, um, with his 70th birthday approaching, the library approached him about a couple of possibilities. One, we asked if he would be interested in some kind of commission, which he wasn't. But the other was the idea of doing a concert, which he was interested in, and which we then did. The 70th anniversary concert was um, quite something. Um, um, what we decided on is that it would be in 3 parts. The first part would be a concert version of his rarely heard musical, The Frogs, with new orchestrations by Jonathan Tunick. The second and largest part was a section called Songs I Wish I'd Written, at least in part, and the final was Songs I'm Glad I Wrote. And for the songs I wish I'd written, he sent me a few faxes with these songs that I began compiling. I think it was a total of 50 or 55 songs that came together. The list was ultimately published in the New York Times and inspired other things like Barbara Cook's mostly Sondheim concerts. Um, and he then selected, I think there were 15 songs from the list that were actually performed that night. Um, I guess I thought I'd scanned the program, but the cast included Nathan Lane was sort of the host and MC, and Audra McDonald, Baron Maisie, Deborah Monk. We had an orchestra of, I think, 24 musicians, a chorus of 12. It sort of broke the bank, but don't tell anybody I said that. But it was a quite a gratifying evening, and it was broadcast on NPR at the time too. Um, so skipping ahead now to the most interesting thing, the Sondheim collection finally arrived in March of 2025, and we processed it in record time. We began serving it in June, and I think we finished the actual final processing in December. These were things that had gone to the conservation office that needed some work and things like that, but the bulk of it was processed by June. Um, our press office did a mammoth promotion. They um, made these slides or photos. They created an office for press where they could download images. They made 3 films that we could show. And I think we have time. I'm going to try and show, if I can, this one. Fingers crossed, folks. We haven't taken these upstairs yet to process. I just opened this box for the very first time. I had no idea what was in it. This is new lyrics for Streisand. The songs for Dick Tracy. You never know what you're going to find in the loose clippings and things there. We found 2 notes from his next door neighbor, Katharine Hepburn. Stephen Sondheim was arguably the most significant musical theater songwriter, composer, and lyricist of the second half of the 20th century. He changed Broadway. He changed people's expectations of what it could be. He started writing musicals about things that people had never written musicals about before. They were adventurous in a way. They were shocking or unexpected.
You'll be swell You'll be great.
Let's hear it for the ladies who lunch.
Have to get your wish, doesn't matter how. Anyway, it doesn't matter now.
Into the woods to lift the spell.
Into the woods to lose the boogie.
I had a dream.
His ability to rhyme and wit, but then to be tender, to be sensitive, to be poetic. He only did the lyrics for West Side Story, but take a song like Maria, the psychology not only of the song itself, but how it functions dramatically in the show. Just before Tony sings that song, Maria's brother tears the lovers apart. Well, when Tony starts singing Maria, Say It Loud, and there's music playing.
Say it loud and there's music playing.
Say it soft and it's almost like praying. It tells the audience immediately the character of his love for her. It really is a deep, passionate love because of that connection. And that's the kind of thing that Sondheim can do brilliantly. And he has to convey things to an audience that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise get.
Isn't it rich?
Are we a pair?
Little Night Music is Sondheim's romantic operetta, basically. Sondheim, he said he wanted it to sound like whipped cream with knives. And I think that gives you a great sense of what that score is like. The Stephen Sondheim collection includes his lyric and music sketches and manuscripts, his scrapbooks, recordings. Those are the heart of the collection. I've never seen anything quite like it. The amount of detail and effort that goes into virtually every song he writes. These are the lyric sketches for A Little Priest from Sweeney Todd. Along the margins, he starts listing all these professions and types of people that might be baked into the pies. Cook, page, sailor, tailor, actor, farmer, baker, driver, gigolo, crier. Through the margins, I counted over 158 types that might be baked into the pies. And I think most of them never ended up in the song. He's giving himself every possibility of alternatives of which way he can go, where's he going to find a good rhyme. There are lists of rhymes on the other side of the margins. There are 40 pages here of these extraordinary lyric sketches for one of the funniest Act One closings in Broadway history. There are pages of just music sketches, playing with ideas of harmonies or melodies or rhythms or the harmonic progressions of numbers. You just don't see this kind of thing, not only just with musical theater composers, but with classical composers too, the level and depth of sketching that goes on as he's experimenting and thinking through these things. Sondheim, to him, the secret of musical theater was collaboration, and he was passionate about it.
I never heard it sound like this. It's wonderful.
In terms of our collections here in the Music Division of the Library of Congress, there are so many connections between Sondheim. His mentor was Oscar Hammerstein. We have the Hammerstein collection. He actually collaborated with Richard Rodgers on the musical Do I Hear a Waltz? He collaborated with Leonard Bernstein, whose collection we have. This is the letter that Sondheim wrote Lenny for the opening night of West Side Story. This is from our Leonard Bernstein collection. Because of Sondheim, we started getting other collections from his collaborators. So there are wonderful connections. And it's one of the great things about having these collections here is they cross-pollinate and researchers can come here. I sent Sondheim a letter inviting him to come to the library, and he came in May of '93. I brought him out Gershwin's manuscript for Porgy and Bess, and he started to cry. And I think that's when he made the decision that he would in fact leave his manuscripts to the library. And in fact, very shortly after, he wrote me a letter about how moved he'd been and how he'd made that decision. The program for the musical he did in high school, so he's 16 years old. The beginning of the career. It will bring in huge amounts of research and scholarship. It preserves the legacy of such an important, significant figure. I think Sondheim's legacy is to be daring and experimental. I think he gave the people who followed him the courage to do the shows they wanted to do. You can do anything as long as you do it with craft and passion and intellect. that was the end of that. It went a little longer than I thought. I hope you guys don't mind. But I will say, I think I sat for an hour and a half, and they edited, I think, pretty brilliantly, so that you got just this sort of small, tight narrative. So anyway, we started processing the collection. One of the frustrations, or I don't know if frustration is the word, but one of the things that people might find interesting is the amount of paper clips that he used through his collection. And we had a contest afterwards for somebody to, we saved them all to see how much they weighed. And the winning was 8 pounds and 13 ounces worth of paper clips and a few other metal things that we removed from the collection. It's for you archivists out there. And what we did was um, anything that was paper clipped, we put inside paper folders within the larger folders. So this is the song Wait from Sweeney Todd. And we put the lyric sketches on the top of the folders, followed by the piano vocal scores, followed by the musical sketches. And we put the lyric sketches first because they were smaller, narrower, and we thought the weight of the music manuscripts on top of them would be less than ideal. And again, for weight, here are on the left is the music manuscript, and on the right is the musical sketches. And as you can see, for that folder alone, there were 7 subfolders, and we numbered each one to keep them in order so researchers coming would know and make sure that things were maintained. And we've tried to be very adamant when researchers come, making sure that they keep things not only in the folders and subfolders in order, but the things within the folders in order. I don't know that we've always succeeded, but that is our goal and hope. The scrapbooks on the right is the first scrapbook for what became Follies, called The Girls Upstairs. This is one of the things that had to go to the conservation office. You can see the slight damage, but there was also a small amount of mold that had to be corrected. This is the collection as it finally appears on the shelves. Okay, let's talk about the collection itself and how we processed it. The idea was to maintain it as close as we could to the way Sondheim himself had organized his collection. And he kept his collection pretty much chronologically, obviously, so that when he finished with one show and one set of boxes, the next show would just go next after that. Within each show, he tended to keep things in show order number. So the opening number to the closing number, and then followed by cut songs and incomplete songs. So it's a very unusual organization, but we decided it was important to maintain it. This is the last page of the Folly section and the first page of the Little Night Music section of the Finding Aid. You'll see on the top part where Follies is, it's ending with cut songs and then things from unidentified productions. And then the start of Night Music begins with the opening number for the show. And you can see it just continues from there. Let's see. And this is just some examples from the collection itself. This is lyric sketches for, I'm sorry, I don't remember, and I don't have my notes here, and I'm trying to read it. Can anyone there read it better than I can? Music sketches. And there's the manuscript for Send in the Clouds, first page. And on the left is the first page of the music manuscript for Franklin Shepherd Inc. And on the right is, I believe, the music sketch for Sunday in the Park with George for Finishing the Hat. On the left there is Rag Me, the Mendelssohn March, which was a very early work. You can see how different his hand is there. And I can't read what's on the right either. Because I didn't have access to my computer, I was never able to finish taking my notes this morning on what the slides were. So forgive me for that. But it just gives you a sense of his hand and how he does things. And that was the primary point. Now, the gratifying thing, as I mentioned, we began serving the collection in um, June. Since then, as of about a week ago, there had been 650 call slips submitted for the collection. These are the ones starting from January. And I believe this sets a record for not only the music division, but the Library of Congress itself. The previous year, the most heavily served collection in the library was the NAACP collection in the manuscript division. That had something over 400 call slips, and the largest in the music division was the Bernstein, which had 300. So again, this is 650 just for the Sondheim collection. And it's been incredibly gratifying, not only the amount of research that's happened because of it, but the emotion behind it. Um, we now have to keep a box of Kleenex in the reading room because so many researchers are sort of tearing up as they open the first folder and see his hand for the first time there. I've seen people shaking. Couples have come on their honeymoon. Parents have brought children. Another thing that's been very gratifying is it's not just scholars and fans, but there have been several songwriters who've come to sort of learn the craft from how he did it. And I think that's just a very gratifying thing as far as I'm concerned. Um, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of Sondheim related things in our general collections. This is a list I made of all the collections that have correspondence from Steve in them. And in some cases, it may just be a letter or two, but some cases it may be 40s or more letters. The richest ones, I believe, are the Hal Prince, the Bernstein, and the Arthur Lawrence letters. And a colleague of mine has just posted a Sondheim reference guide about this and other related collections for other materials, music, not only the correspondence, sound and video recordings, and other collections. We, for instance, acquired the Sondheim 90th birthday concert that went on, I believe it was YouTube. And we got the original videos, not only of the concert itself, but outtakes and rehearsal and all of that stuff. So there are several collections, and there are others that we're in the throes of trying to acquire, and I'm confident we will get at least some of them. And I think that's it. So I welcome all your questions now. And I think I talked a little fast, so I finished sooner than I thought, but I hope you guys have questions that I can answer.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was fantastic. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to unmute and ask if that's faster or easier for you. We have a lot of comments in the chat about the paper clips and the impressed nature of having weighed them, and that several people would like a rusty Sondheim paper clip. So that might be some fundraising for the Library of Congress.
We talked about it.
Yeah, I'd imagine. We do have our first question in the chat. So it's, does the collection hold anything other than scores? So kind of what else does the collection have in it?
Yes. It holds his scrapbooks. It holds his scripts for the things that he wrote. So the screen drafts of the screenplay for The Last of Sheila, some plays he wrote, some things he wrote when he was quite young, scripts that he proposed for radio shows and treatments for I think a film. There's some programs. There are loose materials, things like clippings and programs and sort of advertisements and things like that. Um, there are, what else is there? Um, there's not much else than that. It's not a huge collection. It's about 200 boxes now. I think we said it was 7,000 items. Um, we are still talking to the estate about hoping to acquire some additional things. Oh, it also came with a number of sound and video recordings, which we've transferred to our moving image and recorded sound sections. So that also is something that we got.
Great, thank you. We have a question related to the Sondheim Guide to Resources of the Library of Congress website that you'd mentioned. The photo on the landing page for that website, is that the record collection behind him? Do you know?
I I believe so. I'm going to say yes.
Great, thank you. We also have in the chat somebody commenting on that he did The Last of Sheila with question mark and an exclamation point.
With Anthony Perkins. Yeah, but he actually did. I think it was called the Chorus Girl Murders that they did after that. So they did another sort of murder mystery show that's never been produced. And the collection certainly includes some unproduced stuff. There were a couple of shows that he started on. There was a film it's called Singing Out Loud that I think he wrote 5 or 6 songs for that was never produced. Um, a couple of songs from it have been recorded. He started work on a musical called Muscle that was abandoned. I think there are 2 numbers for that. I'll tell you I think the biggest surprise to me is I thought I knew every song title at least of everything he'd written, but there was one song that I had no idea, I'd never heard of. I'd never seen it on a list before. And it was titled When You Tell a Joke. And it turned out it came with the correspondence that he received related to it. And in the 1970s, it was auctioned off on the public television station in New York that he would write a custom song for someone. And the high bidder was a young guy who wanted Sondheim to write a song for his mother's 50th birthday. And he wrote several letters to Sondheim at Sondheim's request about his mother. And for whatever reason, the thing that Sondheim focused on was the fact that as much as she loved jokes, she couldn't tell them. So he then wrote the song for 4 voices for the 4 children of her, almost like a barbershop quartet. Um, and we have the manuscript for that song that, as far as I know, has never been performed. In fact, I contacted one of the children. They said they never sang it for their mother. Um, the other cute thing about it is that in the song itself he apologizes, and I don't remember the rhyme exactly, but it ends with something like, um, and the song is now for your 52nd. So it was 2 years late after her 50th birthday before he completed it. There you have it. More than you wanted to know.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so cute. Um, see, I'm trying to go through. We have several questions that pops up. So I'm just going to go in order. What is your favorite thing that you found in the collection, and what was the most surprising thing you found?
My favorite thing. I don't know that there's one, but it's been, I just find his lyric sketches endlessly fascinating, and seeing the process of what was cut and didn't make it. I mean, one example, I don't know how many of you know Merrily We Roll Along, but there are all these sections where the that go back in years, 1964, 1963, 1962, and listing the things that happened in that. Well, there are huge swaths of years and things that he drafted in lyrics. And I was just fascinated at seeing how much American and world history he was he went through in coming up with the final versions of those. I think the biggest surprise was the song I just mentioned, the When You Tell a Joke, although I'd also entirely forgotten about that he wrote a commercial for The Simpsons, which is like a 4 or 5 measure thing when he was a guest.
That's awesome.
Oh, and
Um,
one other thing I mentioned that was neat to find. He wrote special lyrics several times for Streisand, and for at least one of the songs, the next with the manuscripts is a fax from her with her ideas of things about herself that he might want to mention or mock or comment on in that version of the song. Like her nose and her fingernails and her bossiness and all of that. So that was a neat, unexpected thing to discover.
Thank you. Still going in order with the comments, trying to not lose track of where I was. There we go. What additional material would you like to acquire from the estate?
It's funny, I just sent them an email yesterday trying to track down all the scripts that, you know, the draft scripts that, for instance, we were told once that he had 17 drafts of what became Follies. Um, and as far as I know, they didn't go up as part of the auction. And I'm hoping that the state somehow still has them and they're willing to give them to us. That's probably the primary thing I can think of what we know exists.
Great, thank you. Kind of in that similar vein, our next question is, why not more correspondence? That's surprising.
He didn't keep correspondence. My understanding was he had like 1 or 2 boxes of the most precious correspondence to him, a letter from Oscar Hammerstein, a letter from Frank Lesser, things like that, and they were lost in the fire. We are actually, I misspoke. At some point in the future, based on his will, we are supposed to get at least some of his emails. But the estate has the option of vetting them to the degree that they wish. And in fact, he directed them to vet certain things. Um, in terms of the scripts, though, by the way, because of Sondheim, we got a Hal Prince collection that includes all his directing copies of scripts of the shows they did together. So it has Prince's copy of Sweeney Todd with all his notes and marginalia and blocking and things like that. So we are rich in them that way, but it doesn't so much give you the evolution and the history of the shows themselves. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, it seems.
Perfectly fine. See, our next question is any manuscript material regarding his lyric books slash memoirs, Hatbox, the collected lyrics of Stephen Sondheim, anything of interest that jumps out at you if you have those materials?
I don't recall seeing anything. I will say I was one of Sondheim's readers for those books. So he emailed me chapters as he finished them, and I still have those. And so I actually have a bunch of my personal collection stuff that I hope to add at some point to the library's holdings. So those draft chapters anyway, which are different than the final versions.
Thank you. Next question is, how did he organize the materials for Wise Guys Bounce Roadshow? Did you have to arrange things differently since that show had so many different iterations?
I'm embarrassed to say yes. For for the last 2 shows, for Wise Guys Bounce Roadshow is in one, and what became known as Here We Are, we did do them differently. For Wise Guys Bounce Roadshow, we did one single alphabetical listing because it was the only way we could figure out how to do it. Um, and for Wise Guys, it was in sections by draft. So I think, as I recall, it was in alphabetical order by these various, I think there were 3 or 4 drafts of it. So those were the aberrant different things that we did, unlike the other portions of the collection.
We have a comment about the correspondence. I appreciate that you cross-referenced correspondence from other collections for researchers to fill some of that gap since it's missing from his collection. I have a
Yes.
processing question as a processor. How many people were working on the collection while it was being processed?
Three. My colleague Janet McKinney, who's breathtaking and brilliant and wonderful, um, and Ellie Hart, who was a technician who also worked a lot on it. She worked particularly on the clippings and scrapbooks, and her handwriting is much better than mine. So I would enter things in online in the finding aid, but then she would transcribe them onto the folders. So between us, I think we did a reasonably good job of that.
Still have time if people have other questions. Please feel free to unmute if it's faster for you than writing in the chat, but please feel free to keep writing them in the chat. I have another question. You had mentioned in one of the earlier pieces of correspondence that you had with him when you're trying to get him to agree to give Library of Congress the papers. Was there anything that you guys were interested in that he wasn't interested in giving you, or vice versa?
Yeah, we asked about business papers, and he was uncomfortable a bit with that. We asked about his date books, and he was uncomfortable with that, somewhat to my surprise. Um, and certainly, we'd asked about the emails, and he, made very clear that he was uncomfortable giving us all of them. And we were pleasantly surprised when he said that they could be vetted and that we would at least be getting some of them.
So is it safe to say that the collection is mostly like his actual like professional working papers and not so much really anything personal?
I, See, I think of it as very personal, um, but the heart and soul of the collection is his music and lyric manuscripts. Mm. So that is the heart of it. If you think about it, though, in terms of the correspondence, what he didn't save are the letters written to him, but we have so many letters that he wrote. So we are actually pretty rich in that. We have several hundred of them, I think, in total. And there's a website, Sondheim Letters, that we've also begun collecting itself. They gave us permission to acquire, in essence, that website or the contents of that website, which also has a lot of correspondence from Steve.
Great. Any other questions, comments, anything anybody wants to get clarification on, know more about?
I have a question, Megan. Mark, it's Nora. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask if at the time of transfer or during the discussions you were having with him, and copyright notwithstanding, what was his thought about perhaps a digital legacy? I know you had mentioned emails, but I don't know if he was scoring anything electronically by that point, or if he. We have a composer's papers here at Case Western where the family is starting to begin to be interested in that, overlooking the copyright to make things available through our digital repository. It's early days, but I wonder what his thoughts were about that. If any.
It's in it first. You just reminded me also, it took almost 2 years for us to get the collection. So that was one of the frustrating things. Um, the estate was just very slow in getting it to us. And one of the things that it wasn't Sondheim's will that we did get recently is they had made scans of many of his manuscripts, not all of them, but I'd say the majority of his manuscripts. And we finally got those. And it was also in the caveat in his will that we had them to make them available to NYPL so that they could have copies of them. I believe I think they got those copies directly from the estate they were supposed to. Um, Unfortunately, we found them to be of pretty mediocre quality. So if we did put things online, we'd have to rescan things. We wouldn't put them up as that.
Yeah.
Um, my sense is this estate is fairly protective. My
Mhm.
my hope is um, I worked on a fairly extensive Bernstein website for the library, and one of the things it included was we got permission to put scans of his music sketches online, not his fair copy final versions of the songs. So
Oh,
researchers could see the work in progress, but they'd still have to buy the sheet music if they actually wanted to perform or play it. And my hope plan is to ask the estate at an appropriate time if they'd be willing to consider that. It
yeah.
usually takes us about 5 years from first suggesting a website before they actually happen. So I don't feel a big rush right now. Um, but it is on my radar of something I plan to pursue.
Yeah. Well, that makes all kinds of sense. So thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Any
Somebody
other?
must have one other question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, please ask. Feel free to unmute if it's faster.
Is everybody on this Zoom local or is it national?
Mine, I'm pretty sure it's pretty varied.
I encourage anyone interested to come look at the collection themselves and partake of its wonders.
Oh, we've got South Dakota, Los Angeles, New York, North Carolina, Connecticut, Santa Fe, Seattle, Memphis. So yeah, we're all over the country. Um, but it might be a good
Oh,
excuse to visit DC.
and despite everything, DC is still a nice place to visit.
Well, Mark, I do have one question for you specifically. Do you have a favorite Sondheim musical? If you had to
Sunday in the
pick one.
Sunday in the Park with George. It's the one that moves me the most, in part because my mother was a painter, and so I grew up in that world. But also, I think more than anything, there's a song in it called "Move On" that
Mm.
has the lyric, I chose and my life was shaken. So what? The choice may have been mistaken. The choosing was not. You have to move on. And that lyric itself has changed my life multiple times. It's given me the courage to make life decisions that were at the time quite difficult and in each case turned out quite wonderfully, including quitting my job at Arena Stage to take the job at the library here because I initially had to take a pay cut to come here. And but it just was such an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. So that's the
That,
answer.
that's amazing. Thank you.
Could
Let,
we just one more if we're going down this way, this path? Um, Thoughts about the most recent revival of Company?
I didn't like it. Um,
Uh,
but
I feel seen.
it's exactly the kinds of things I didn't like. I thought the concept of having a woman Bobby was fine and made
Yeah,
sense, and I was happy with that. But I just found so much of the staging sort of silly, and the casting of the friends. There wasn't anybody on that stage I'd want to be friends with.
yeah.
Um, but ironically, I got an email from Sondheim about the version in London, and he said it was the best show he'd ever seen, and it made him cry, and he saw it 6 times, and he mentioned particularly Jonathan Bailey. So,
Okay. So that's a new way for me to look at that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but the most recent version of Merrily, I thought it's the first time I really felt the show worked, and it was entirely because of that cast, and particularly Jonathan Groff. It was funny because I found it sort of a mediocrely directed production. The physical staging wasn't great. They added some dialogue that I found sort of silly, but those performances were so rich and real and made the show work in a way I'd never seen it before. So
Oh,
and they videotaped it. The videotape is actually, I think, in some ways better than the show because of all the close-ups, and you don't have to see some of the staging that was less than ideal. So I think it's available on Prime or YouTube or Netflix now. So I encourage people to see that.
oh, well, thank you very much. Like I said, I feel seen.
Makes me feel better that I didn't get to see the Merrily show in person. Makes me feel less bad about having to watch the pro shot. So thank you. Any last questions? Any last call for questions? Okay. Well, Mark, thank you so much again. This was wonderful and amazing, and I encourage people to come to DC to see the Sondheim papers and some of the other amazing collections connected to those. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. And my apologies for the technical difficulties.
It all went fine, so no worries at all. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Is there anything else you'll need from me?
No, I'm usually just go ahead and close and stop the recording. Oh,
Okay.
do that. You sure you want to stop the recording?